Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire were the first games that I became obsessed with growing up. Generation 3 as a whole basically shaped my childhood. While my first Pokémon game was technically Colosseum, I didn't really understand it at the time. It wasn't until I was at a friend's house for a sleepover that he showed me the magic of the main series games on the Game Boy Advance. That summer, I did everything I could to get the Gen 3 Pokémon games. It didn't take long before I was going on my own adventures through the Hoenn region. For a lot of fans, your first Pokémon game often becomes your favorite, and I definitely fall into that category. So, of course, as the years went on, I patiently waited for a remake of the games I cherished as a kid. It wouldn't be until 2014 that Game Freak finally announced a remake of Ruby and Sapphire, and this was special. Online speculation was running rampant for years leading up to the reveal. So to see that it was not only finally happening, but it was being made from the ground up in full 3D had my hype level on another planet. Leading up to the release of Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Game Freak released a special demo with exclusive content over a month before the game released. Before we jump into the main game, I'd like to cover this demo as I never played it when it came out and you could no longer download it through official means. The demo begins with our trainer riding with Steven on the back of a Latias as we land in Mauville City. Steven refers to us as Orlando, which is interesting that we're given a set name instead of picking our own. Hoenn is a very tropical region, so I assume we're named after the famous city in Florida, which also happens to be tropical. Steven tells us that we have business in the Moss Deep Space Center, but before we can go inside, we get ambushed by some Team Aqua Grunts. Steven lets us pick between 3 starters to battle them, but they happen to be in their middle stage, which is cool. I picked Grovyle because I almost never pick Trico during the actual game, so I figured I'd mix it up. After beating the Aqua Grunt, we're told that they found the location of a special Mega Evolving Pokemon and are heading to an island to capture it. At this point, we can roam around Moss Deep, but it doesn't seem like there's much to do, so we talk to Steven to start our next objective. We end up on a remote island in search of the Grunts. I spent some time gaining experience by battling wild Pokemon, and my Grovyle evolved into a Sceptile. Further ahead, we encounter Team Magma Grunts who didn't put up much of a fight. Inside the cave, we encounter May, who tells us that the admins of both teams are just up ahead. It's pretty funny because they try to team up together to fight us off. Steven shows up and grants us the ability to use Mega Evolution, and we engage in a double battle. It's pretty crazy because he just casually rolls up with a shiny Metagross and Mega Evolves it. After chasing off the admins, Steven mentions something about entrusting us with the Metagross someday, which piqued my interest. As we exit the cave, I wanted to mention this cool camera angle we get outside. I don't know why, but it reminds me of a Gate Village from the GameCube titles, specifically Gale of Darkness with the angle of everything. We then enter the last cave and encounter a wild Glalie and capture it. Steven tells us it's capable of Mega Evolution and it's even carrying its stone. He hints to story elements that we'll encounter in the actual game, and then things get wrapped up pretty quickly. I've read online that you can replay the demo multiple times and unlock secret missions, which I won't be covering here, but I thought the demo was really cool. It makes me sad that Game Freak could have released little bite-sized quest DLCs for the 3DS games, it never did. Could you imagine getting post-game quests with self-contained adventures after doing everything else in the game? That would have been amazing. Either way, now that we're finished with the demo, it's time to start a fresh save of Pokémon Omega Ruby. If that music doesn't take you back to a simpler time, then I don't know what will. While making this video, something kind of interesting dawned on me. Not only do I feel nostalgic for the original Ruby and Sapphire, but enough time has passed where the remakes themselves give me those warm, fuzzy memories. It's hard to think about, but these games are already over 10 years old, which is just crazy to me. Game Freak really went all out during the introduction to these games, from the Game Boy Advance graphics on the Pokénav to the 3D environments as the moving truck is headed towards Little Root. It really goes to show that when Game Freak wants to, they can make amazing things happen. It might not look like much now, but they really were pushing the 3DS to its limits at the time. I don't know how to explain it, but to me, these games look much better than Pokémon X and Y, even though they were built using the same engine. I don't know if it's because I'm biased towards liking Hoenn more, or if it really does look better, but either way, we create our character and we can freely exit the moving truck, which is just hilarious that they kept this aspect from the original. Little Root is one of my favorite starting towns in Pokémon, probably because I've spent so much time here in both the originals and the remakes. I've started countless new saves in Hoenn over the years to the point where Little Root actually feels like home. The music is soothing, and the town itself has that perfect quaint feel that's become synonymous with a new adventure in the series. The remakes did a good job at capturing the vibe of Littleroot, from the sunlight peeking through the trees as they sway in the wind, to the flowers and the grass that gently dance to the breeze. If you check the sign, you even get a cool camera angle accompanied by a quote that reads, "A town that can't be shaded any hue," which seems fitting for a starting town. It symbolizes that the adventure you embark on is yours to choose and you can make it what you want. Anyway, after heading next door, we meet the rival trainer May, who happens to be the daughter of Professor Birch. After our introduction, she heads out to help her dad with research. When we try to leave town, we hear someone screaming for help. This is when we encounter one of the hardest decisions in all of Pokémon, trying to decide which Gen 3 starter to choose from. I genuinely love all three choices here. Trico was always a favorite of mine growing up, but I almost never pick it because one of my favorite Pokémon in Gen 3 also happens to be Grass type. Torchic is yet again a big favorite of mine. From the TV show to the cards and the games, Blaziken is just cool across all media, and it was typically my pick as a kid. Then we have Mudkip. Who doesn't love this guy? From its cute design to its incredible typing being ground water. I've spent hours amongst all saves I've made over the years trying to decide which Pokemon to pick. Even now, while making this video, I'm having to think about who I want to use, which goes to show what a solid trio the Hoenn starters are. After some time, I decided to go with Mudkip, which we used in our first battle to save the professor from a wild Poochyena. After we defeat it, Birch tells us to meet us back at the lab where he gives us the Pokemon to keep. I like Professor Birch. He has this laid-back, carefree style which fits perfectly with the region's tropical vibe. He tells us to go on a little adventure to Route 103, which is north of the next town over, to meet up with May. Route 101 is your typical early game route. There's a few ledges and patches of wild grass. It's here we can encounter Zigzagoon, which isn't anything special other than being good at using basic HM moves. The reason I bring this up is because as a kid trying to play through Colosseum, the first battle you encounter is against Zigzagoons, so seeing them again in 3D all these years later always reminded me of that. Back in 2014, it made me think about the possibility of getting the GameCube titles ported to the 3DS, which was silly in hindsight, but I was hopeful. Anyway, after a quick walk, we make it to Oldale Town, which has the same quaint vibe as Littleroot. I'll mention this a lot, but Hoenn is a region where nature is the main theme, from the towns to the music and everything in between. I love that Oldale Town looks like it was set up in a field and just stayed the same over the years. If we ever get a Legends game set in Hoenn, it'll be interesting to see how they handle things. Once we reach Route 103, we quickly find May, where we engage in our first rival battle. She picked Trico, which is strong against our Mudkip, but the battle didn't cause us much trouble. Once we beat her, she tells us to head back to the lab and meet her there. I wanted to mention that the games have fantastic lighting, specifically the evening like you see here. I miss when Pokemon games actually had true day-night cycles because it made playing feel a lot more immersive. Some of the newer titles technically still have this, but day and night will rotate a few times an hour as opposed to real time. Back at the lab, the professor gives us a Pokédex and some Pokéballs, and our adventure is fully underway. We can now head out west from Oldale Town to Route 102, which is much bigger than previous routes. Here we encounter regular trainer battles, and we can even find berries. The original Gen 3 games introduced us to berry farming, and I'm glad to see it make a return here. Berry farming is easily one of my favorite features in Pokemon. It incentivizes you to come back every day and check on your berries. You can also get some really great late game items here using this feature, and it's relaxing and immersive to have this in the game. I hope that one day this returns the way it should be, but for now, I can always come back and enjoy it the way it is. Towards the end of the route, we run into May and watch a really nice cutscene showing Beautifly fluttering towards Pedalburg. Once we get into town and check the signs, it describes Pedalburg as a place where people mingle with nature, which contributes to the theming of the region I mentioned earlier. It's here where we meet Norman, which is the 5th gym leader of the game, so we can't take him on quite yet. Unique to the Hoenn games, this also happens to be our father, which is a really cool detail. Not only do we have a dad in these games, but we have to battle him later on in a gym match. We also meet Wally here, which acts as a secondary rival later in the game. Wally is a fan favorite character, but we'll discuss this more as he becomes more relevant to the story. After talking with our dad for a while, he tells us that we need to get stronger, so we should head to Rustboro to test our skills against the first gym leader. Before we leave town, there's a few things I want to say about Pedalburg. Firstly, I love that the town is more populated but still feels very in tune with nature. It's surrounded by small lakes and the houses have hedges lining the outside, which culminates in a very peaceful town to be in. There's also an NPC facing one of the lakes, and I've always liked what he says. My face is reflected in the water. It's a shining grin full of hope, or maybe it's a look of somber silence struggling with fear. What do you see in your face? I don't know why, but sometimes the dialogue in Pokémon becomes very wholesome or introspective, and I love it. These games are filled to the brim with dialogue like this, and I'll try to point out my favorites as we explore Hoenn further. Anyway, after leaving Pedalburg, we hit Route 104, which looks really nice. It's a seaside path where you can battle trainers on the beach or catch wild Pokémon in the patches of grass further from the shore. There's even a nice little cottage with a dock on this route. This is where Mr. Briny lives, but we'll talk about him later. Next, we head into the Pedalburg Woods. This is one of my favorite early game dungeons in Pokémon. Not only do I love forested areas in video games, but this place is home to one of my favorite Pokémon of all time. That's right, we're adding Shroomish to the team. I don't know why, but I feel like this guy is a bit underrated. I love the way Shroomish looks, but it gets even better when it evolves into Breloom. This is the main reason I never pick Trico, because no matter how hard I try not to use Shroomish, I can't help myself. I remember my first playthrough of Sapphire on the GBA and catching Shroomish on a whim. I had never seen this Pokemon before, so I was shocked when it finally evolved into Breloom. The combo typing of grass and fighting, while it looks like a dinosaur mixed with mushrooms, really blew me away as a kid. To this day, it's easily one of my top 10 favorite Pokemon of all time. Anyway, I've gone on long enough about Shroomish. As I said, I like Pedalburg Woods. The music isn't as iconic as Eterna Forest in Sinnoh, but it's still good. It gives a much more creepy vibe as opposed to being serene. In the remakes, this place looks fantastic. The way the sun or the moonlight trickles in through the trees as you're wandering around is a great detail. Early on in the forest, we run into a Devon researcher looking for Shroomish. He clearly has good taste. He gets interrupted by a Team Magma grunt who ambushes him, but we manage to step in and save the day. As thanks for chasing off the grunt, we're granted the experience share, which is pretty controversial. It can make the game too easy, but luckily since this is Gen 6, you have the option to turn it off. For the sake of the video, I'm going to keep it on, but I do like to play without if I'm taking my time. Once we get through the forest, we reach the other side of Route 204. It's here we discover the flower shop where we can get the Whalmer Pail. This is what we need to effectively plant berries as it allows us to water them once the seeds are in the ground. Also, just look at how good the interior looks in this building. I really missed interior locations in Scarlet and Violet, and seeing a place like this on older hardware just makes me sad that they seem to be moving away from this style. The rest of the route looks really cool. I love the wooden bridge that crosses the lake leading up to Rustboro City. This is the first big town in Hoenn. I remember not really liking the vibe here as a kid, but the remakes did a good job at making it look a little nicer. In the original, the color palette seemed dull when the game was so colorful leading up to this. Thankfully, the cheery music and updated visuals actually make me like Rustboro quite a bit. This town also happens to be home to the first gym leader who utilizes rock types. Her gym was pretty bland in the originals, but here it's become a fossil museum with a great looking interior. I love that you can even see a map of Hoenn that was based off the original art instead of the newer map. Anyway, after battling a few gym trainers, we can finally battle Roxanne. With Shroomish and Mudkip on the team, this fight isn't tough, but I remember struggling a little bit as a kid since I always picked Torchic growing up. After beating her, we get the Stone Badge, which allows us to use Cut outside of battle, which is entirely optional in Hoenn, but you get some really good items by using it to discover hidden areas. After leaving the gym, we can see a Magma grunt running away from the Devon building. We then see the same Devon researcher that we saved from the forest running after him. It turns out the grunt has stolen parts and we need to track him down and get them back. This leads us through Route 116, which doesn't have much going on, but towards the end we find a cave entrance. Before heading inside, we can talk to Mr. Briny again, who lost his Wingull in the cave. Upon entering, we find the Magma grunt and make quick work of him. We not only save Wingull, but we also get the parts back, so now we can head back to town and return them. Before we know it, we return the parts and we're welcomed by Mr. Stone, the president of the Devon Corporation. He thanks us for saving his employee twice and asks us to deliver a letter to a guy named Steven who's on Duford Island across the sea. And what do you know, this also happens to be the location of the second gym. Since we don't have access to surf yet, we can go to Mr. Briny's sea cottage and ask him to sail us to Duford. I love this cutscene for a multitude of reasons. I've talked a lot on the channel about how I love the 3DS's visuals. Even today, it impresses me that we basically had a pocket GameCube and the graphics for Pokémon on the 3DS will always remind me of Colosseum. Visuals aside, the music is fantastic. It's so upbeat and adventurous, and I love that we're finally getting to set sail. The early 2000s, for some reason, were obsessed with islands and tropical themes. Wind Waker, Mario Sunshine, and even Pokémon hopped on this trend. Wind Waker is one of my favorite Zelda games, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that this game is the Wind Waker of Pokémon. We'll discuss sailing more later when we have more control over things, but for now we get to explore Duford. The sign in town describes it as a tiny island in a blue sea. This basically sums up Duford. There's a few houses and some fishermen, and one small route with a cave at the end. We'll see a lot of towns like this moving forward. Small towns that lean heavily into the theme of nature with unique aesthetics. It's one of the main reasons I love Hoenn as a region, because the towns themselves feel like they're characters. Duford might not be all that exciting, but it's memorable, which goes a long way for me. Anyway, before we deliver the letter to Steven, I figured we'd stop by the gym, which is completely different from the originals. It's based on fighting types, so this time around it looks like an actual gym as opposed to the dark maze of the original. I liked the original puzzle, but this change makes sense. It still incorporates the darkness you'd have to navigate, although it's much easier to handle here. At the end of the gym, we find Brawly. I love his design because it just looks so early 2000s. He's got that surfer gym bro vibe, and after a somewhat long battle where I had to use Shroomish to set up against his team, we get the Knuckle badge. Next, we'll head to Granite Cave to find Steven. This location used to be a proper dungeon before finding Steven, but now it's just a straight path to him. The dungeon still exists, it's just no longer required now. As we enter the room, we're shown ancient depictions of Groudon and Kyogre. While Steven is admiring the art, he mentions something about this being different to Mega Evolution, which we'll learn about later. After handing him the letter, he tells us that we've been capable enough to take on the League and that we should keep training. When we talk to Mr. Briny again, he tells us that we should take the recovered Devon parts to Captain Stern and Slateport, so we yet again set sail. This time we end up on Route 109, which is a giant beachfront with a lot of trainers to battle. I like this area because there's kind of a hidden side quest here. If you defeat every trainer, you can go to the seashore house and get free soda pops, which isn't anything crazy, but I love optional content like this in Pokemon. There's also an NPC on the beach I like to talk to. This old man says, "The water around these parts is clean, but my Zigzagoon still picks up litter from the shoreline at times. Dirty water becomes rain and joins our rivers, which we drink from. If we pollute the sea, it all comes back to haunt us eventually." I love this dialogue because it hints at Zigzagoon's pickup ability, and it's also really wholesome. It's the NPCs like this that really put you in the world of Pokemon and make it feel more real despite being so fantastical. Anyway, now we can head up to Slateport City. This is a port town with a lot of memorable locations. Firstly, there's the outdoor market where people come to sell unique items. I like the look of the place because it almost feels like a festival. Then we're introduced to contests, which we'll talk more about in a bit. I love how the houses look like modern seaside cottages and the roofs even resemble waves in the ocean. The first place we need to go to is Stern's shipyard. We don't find the captain here as he's apparently at the Oceanic Museum, but we do get a cool angle of a ship they're building from the upstairs balcony. Back at the Oceanic Museum, they charge us $50 to enter and the place is swarmed with Team Magma grunts. They aren't hostile on the main level, so despite their presence, we can actually enjoy the vibe in here. The music is soft and peaceful, and visually this place looks so much better than in the originals. The remakes added a lot of charm and character to places that seemed standard in the base game. To this day, I'm impressed with the level of attention they gave to seemingly bland places. It makes me think that Game Freak must really love Hoenn, as these games feel really cared for during development. Upstairs, we find the captain and hand over the parts. Shortly after, we get ambushed by two Team Magma grunts, which we defeat easily. However, the leader of the team, named Maxie, joins us upstairs, and we learn the motivations behind their team. Essentially, Team Magma wants to expand the landmass of Hoenn so people can develop society further without running out of room. He believes the region has too much water and it's stopping people from developing a truly utopian society. His reasoning sounds a bit silly, and maybe it is, but when you think about the theming of these games, it honestly makes sense. You have two teams trying to fight with forces of nature to improve the world, but they're both destructive and harmful in their own ways. The reality is, these games showcase how people and Pokemon can live in harmony together, and the balance of nature and humanity is already perfect here. They won't realize this for a while, so for now, it's time to move on. Once we try to leave town, Lizia stops us and gives us a contest pass, which is required if we want to participate. We also get the Pokeblock kit, which allows us to use berries to make blocks to improve our contest abilities. I've talked about this in my BDSP video before, but I love the mini loop and gameplay mechanics here. berry farming is already a really cool side activity that I love, but now you can use those berries to enhance a completely separate side mode, which just feels satisfying. The amount of things that they crammed into these older games just goes to show what we're missing in the newer ones. Anyway, the contests work pretty much the same as they did in the originals. I'm not very good at them, but basically you have to try to get more hearts from the crowd than your opponents. It's a timing thing because the turn order is constantly changing. This isn't my favorite side mode, but I do like it. I remember being in a Dairy Queen with a friend growing up and watching him try to dominate the contests in Emerald, and for some reason I just had to go home and train up some Pokémon specifically for contests. It didn't work out for me, but the fact that this mode is here at all is a big positive for me. Not only can you train your Pokémon to be good at battling, but you can specifically train a Pokémon to be a contest star. Variety is always a good thing, and these games have a ton of different things to do. We're not even done talking about all the side activities yet, but that'll come soon enough. Next, we'll head to Route 110. In the remakes, we get this really cool camera angle that makes the entire route look futuristic and really nice. Funny story about this area. As a kid, I used to make it all the way to this point and then have to restart the game over and over again. Why? Not because of some tough battle or getting lost. No, I restarted because I didn't realize the biking road was over the path. From the perspective of the GBA games, it looked like a barrier. I don't know how I didn't realize this, but it was so frustrating as a kid, and I wonder if any of you ever had this happen. Probably not, but I'll feel a little better if I wasn't alone in this. Route 110 also has the Trick House. This is a unique little location. Every time you get access to a new HM move, you can come here and go through the mazes and get a prize at the end. This is a weird location, but I like it a lot. It's a good place to train up your Pokémon and also get some good items along the way. If you head west from the Trick House, you reach the other side of Route 103. I always thought this was cool because once you get Surf, it acts as a shortcut to Oldale Town. There's nothing much here other than a few trainers to battle. Anyway, as we continue up Route 110, we run into May and have yet another rival fight. Thankfully, this wasn't too tough, but as a kid I struggled bad against her. I remember there were playthroughs where I might have to reset 4 or 5 times just to beat her. As we get towards the end of the route, I wanted to mention how cool of an idea this area is. There's the biking road above the path we just took, which is supposed to be for people to travel on because the lower path is meant for Pokémon. That's why it's almost entirely overgrown with tall grass. It's just another great example of how well thought out the theming was for this game. As we reach Mauville, it's immediately obvious that this place is nothing like how it was in the original games. It's now a huge mall with condos and even a rooftop park. This city contradicts the theming of nature the game has had up to this point, but there's a reason behind that. There's a pretty creepy lore implication that we'll discuss later on, but it's pretty genius. Honestly, I'm kinda not a fan of this change. I think the city is cool and it's obviously inspired by Lumio City. There's even a replica of the famous Prism Tower in the courtyard. Game Freak has been a fan of these major cities since Gen 5, but it feels like they kinda shoehorned it in so that Hoenn could have a big city as well. Don't get me wrong, I think it looks great, but it's kind of annoying to navigate, whereas the original city worked fine. Before we do anything, we're gonna head to the bike shop where we can choose between 2 models, the Mach Bike or the Acro. This is another thing unique to Hoenn, and it's really cool that they kept this for the remakes. The Mach Bike allows you to ride up tall slopes that you wouldn't normally be able to access, and the Acro Bike allows you to hop from specific platforms that grant you access to secret areas. I went with the Mach Bike, but you can always come back and swap them out. Before we head to the gym, we see Wally and his uncle in front of it. I mentioned before how Wally is a fan favorite character, and I think it's because his story is pretty intriguing. He was raised in Pedalburg but moved to his uncle's house in Verdanturf so he could get some fresh air. Wally has some kind of illness, and we see him progressively get stronger and stronger throughout the game and start to come out of his shell. This encounter with Wally was an easy fight, but it shows how he's trying to become healthier and stronger all at the same time. I like Wally quite a bit, but it feels like he's somewhat forgotten about by Game Freak. I think the last time we saw or heard from him was the Battle Tree in the Alola region, but again, if there's ever a Legends game set in Hoenn, it'll be cool to see what they do with him. With that out of the way, we can finally challenge the 3rd gym leader. Watson is an electric type leader, and his gym puzzle is actually largely unchanged despite everything in Mauville being so different. Thankfully with Marshtomp, this fight is a breeze and we get the Dynamo badge, which allows us to use Rock Smash outside of battle. Unlike Cut, this HM is actually required to progress. Next, we need to head north of Mauville, but before we do that, we're actually going to head west as there's quite a bit to explore. Route 117 is home to the Pokémon Breeder, but other than that, it's a route with a lot of trainer battles, so it's a great spot to grind. Further west, we reach Verdanturf Town. This is a small and optional town with a contest hall and a few houses, which look like modern log cabins with skylights in the roofs. It's a perfect little nature town, so it makes sense that Wally would move here to try to get healthy. Through the cave up north, if you use Rock Smash, it creates a shortcut that leads back to Rustboro. I love the weaving routes all throughout Hoenn that brilliantly connect everything together as you get more HM moves. Anyway, we can now head north of Mauville to progress the story. Route 111 has a cool location called the Windstraight House. This is where you battle all the members of a family in a row, and when you beat them, you get the Macho Brace. This is one of those areas that always stuck with me throughout the years. Towards the end of Route 111, we encounter the first desert in the Pokémon series, although we can't explore it just yet. We next head to Route 112, which leads straight to Mount Chimney. There's a few magma grunts blocking our way to the cable car, so we have to take the cave to get to the other side. Once we pass through the fiery path, we're finally introduced to secret bases. This is my favorite side activity in all of Pokémon. It's basically like Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer built into Pokémon. You can search all throughout Hoenn for cool spots to make your base, and you can even have people visit them. I can't tell you how cool it was in its prime. Between the secret bases, the berry farming, and the contests, it almost feels like there's a mini life sim built into these games, and I love it so much. For the video, I won't dive deep into this activity, but just know that I love it. I've spent countless hours in my personal saves just getting new items for my base and finding the perfect location for it. Next, we head to Route 113. This route looks really unique to anything we've seen in the series up to this point. As we climb higher up the mountain, we start to see ash falling from the sky. Because of it, the route itself is covered in soot. It almost looks like it's snowing. The variety of visuals we've seen in Hoenn up to this point is seriously impressive. After a while, we make it to Fall Arbor Town. Before we even get a chance to relax, May pulls us into Professor Cosmo's house where his wife tells us that he was abducted and taken to Meteor Falls by Team Magma Grunts. Before we take care of that, let's talk about the town itself. It's described as a farm community with small gardens, which makes this town even more unique. You'd think it'd be green, but it's very mountainous and surprisingly desolate. There's also crater impacts all around town that either came from space or the volcano itself. There's not much to do in town, but I like the vibe here. Route 114 is pretty unique as it's very mountainous with craters all throughout. This leads us directly to Meteor Falls, which is another really good looking location. It's here we run into May and engage in a double battle against a Team Magma admin and a grunt. After we beat them, Team Aqua's Archie shows up, and despite us winning the battle, Team Magma makes off with the meteorite that the professor was trying to protect. Archie doesn't say much other than wanting to build a world that's better for Pokémon and then heads off as well. Now, the only thing to do is head for Mount Chimney, where the Magma Grunts were headed to confront them head on. Once we get to the peak of the volcano, we see Team Magma and Aqua Grunts fighting each other, which I always thought was kind of funny. Also, I gotta mention how good this area looks in the remakes. The lighting cast from the lava below looks fantastic, and it shows how much they can improve areas from the originals. After fighting a few grunts, we have to fight Tabitha, one-on-one this time. After beating them, we come face to face with Maxie, who tells us the legend of Groudon, who is capable of forming new lands on the planet. The meteorite they stole is said to be capable of turning into a keystone or even a megastone. After a while, he starts a battle with us, but we defeat him quickly. He then gives us the meteorite back and leaves. Archie shows up and says that he must have found out where the real orbs were located before leaving as well. The villain's story won't come back for a while, which is kinda nice because even though I love it, I don't like when it becomes the main focus of the game, so it's nice to get a break once in a while and just focus on the gyms. If you head south from Mount Chimney, we reach the Jagged Pass, which looks really good in the remakes. I like when they play around with the camera angles in this game and show us perspectives that weren't possible in the originals. Once we head south in the Jagged Pass long enough, we reach Lava Ridge Town. This is a town at the base of the volcano. It's always been memorable to me simply just because of the hot springs that you can access through the Pokémon Center. I remember discovering this as a kid and thinking I found a secret on the same level as Missing No or the Mew under the truck. Can you tell I wasn't the brightest kid? Other than that, this town doesn't have much to offer. There's an herb shop, which is cool, but the main feature here is the 4th gym. This gym puzzle is pretty much unchanged from the original games as well, and it's not one of my favorites. It's a warp puzzle, which used to be pretty common in the series. It's not horrible, just not enjoyable, but hey, at least the interior looks nice. The gym leader is Flannery, who uses fire-type Pokémon. Her ace Pokémon is Torkoal. I bring this up because I like Torkoal a lot, and I think it's pretty underrated. I grew up watching the Deoxys movie over and over again. We used to rent it from the library every weekend, and one of the trainers in the movies used a Torkoal, which always looked really cool. It's not great statistically, but it's one of my favorite Gen 3 designs. Anyway, we take her down without much trouble and earn the Heat badge, which allows us to use strength outside of battle. Next, we head back to Pedalburg to face our dad in a gym match, but first I want to stop by the desert section of Route 111. There's a lot of great Pokemon in the wild you can add to your team here, including the 2 fossils introduced in Gen 3. The Root Fossil, which becomes Lileep, or the Claw Fossil, which becomes Anorith. I've never used the fossil Pokemon on a team, but someday I need to. They're pretty good and I like their designs. Back at Pedalburg, we can finally battle Norman. It's so surreal that we're fighting our own dad in a Pokemon game. Unless I'm forgetting something really obvious, I believe this is the only instance where the protagonist has a father in the main games. Or at least one that you actually meet and get to talk to. On top of that, the gym battle can be extremely tough. Even if you have a fighting type, his slackings are no joke. We got pretty lucky during our gym match, so thankfully a tough fight became somewhat bearable. With Norman defeated, we earn the Balance Badge and gain the ability to use Surf outside of battle. This is truly when Hoenn opens up, and the ability to use Surf unlocks a multitude of different areas. There's lots of new places to explore now, and future locations will utilize it as well. Before we progress the story, there's a few areas worth talking about now that we can set sail on our own. Firstly, I love that there are tiny islands in the sea with trainers to fight or items to collect. It feels like a cool island hopping adventure. The main thing I like to do right after getting Surf is sailing south of Slateport and heading west to find Sea Mauville. The Pokemon series is no stranger to large cruise ships to explore, but this being a full-blown shipwreck is insanely cool. It looks more like an oil rig in the remakes, but either way. Not only do I love this conceptually, but it looks fantastic in the remakes. For this being a location that most people just skip over, they really went above and beyond to make it look good. Sea Mauville's story is one of the darkest in the series. I won't go too in-depth with it, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Essentially, it was built to extract energy from Pokemon in the ocean. Gym leader Watson was implied to have been a leader on the project, while Professor Cosmos' dad was an employee that worked here. The employees of this project were largely overworked and underpaid. The letters from Cosmos' son, who we met earlier in the game, progressively get sadder and sadder as they arrive. It starts with him missing his dad to talking about how his mom isn't sad anymore because she has a new friend, which is implying that she was being unfaithful. The letters become darker and darker until they finally stop. The whole area gives a new meaning to Mauville as you wonder if the new expansion to the city has dark secrets just like this area. I highly recommend that you read these letters in full if you ever get the chance because they're surprisingly dark for a Pokemon game, and for that reason, I really love it. On top of the lore implications, the location itself is really fun to explore, but you can't see everything here until you get Dive, so we'll have to come back a little later. Anyway, east of Mauville, we can now use Surf to get to the other side of Route 118, where we run into Steven. A cutscene plays where Latias takes us to a mysterious island where we think it needs some kind of help. The perspective of the camera is insanely cool here and it looks very relaxing. Before long, we meet Latios near the back of the island, but Team Magma shows up to try to steal the Mega Stone from it. After we beat them, Latios joins our party and Steven gives us the Mega Bracelet, which allows us to Mega Evolve our Pokemon in battle. One of the coolest things about the remakes is the fact that we got new Mega Evolutions, which really spiced up the game and made it feel fresh. We soon reach Route 119, which is yet another unique looking route, with super tall grass that trainers hide in. It's pretty rainy here, so it makes sense that the grass would be more overgrown as opposed to the other routes in the region. Near the end of the route, we reach the Weather Institute. It seems that Team Magma is causing trouble here as well, so we head to the second floor to put an end to it. We meet Tabitha again and beat him in battle, where he reveals that they want to use Groudon's power to dry up the oceans. Before the battle, you can sense some doubt as to whether or not he's doing the right thing, but after we beat him, Team Magma scurries off and we save the researchers in the Institute. On our way to Fortree City, we run into May again and have another rival battle. In the remakes, she only has 3 team members, so she's not hard to beat. She gives us Fly when we beat her, but honestly, Hoenn is one of those regions where I prefer to explore on foot. Even when I'm backtracking, the variety of biomes is so satisfying that I don't mind taking a few extra minutes to get to my destination. Anyway, we soon get to Fortree City, and this is probably my favorite city in all of Pokemon. The modern games seem to lean heavily on being inspired by real-world locations, but this is just good. The town is described as a treetop city that frolics with nature. I don't know about you guys, but I used to dream of living in a treehouse when I was a kid. I think it was a late 90s or early 2000s thing, but they were everywhere in media. From Bart Simpson to Arthur and even the Magic Treehouse books. They were everywhere, and as a kid, getting to this city for the first time really lit up my imagination. I've mentioned it plenty of times, but I grew up playing in the forests of my hometown, so naturally, I find these types of locations peaceful. So this town culminates in everything I love out of a fantasy location. There's even an NPC that I love here. They say the ground absorbs rainwater and the trees grow by drinking that water. Our 4-tree city exists thanks to having both earth and water. Not only does this set the tone for what makes the city so great, but it also ties into the theme of the evil villains trying to have either of the forces of nature take over. Simply put, we need both to survive, and 4-tree city is a thriving example of this. Anyway, there's an invisible barrier blocking us from going to the gym at the moment, so we head to Route 120. We soon meet Steven on the bridge where he gives us the Devon scope, which allows us to see that the invisible barriers are actually just Kecleons blending into their surroundings. With the Devon scope in hand, we can head back to 4-tree city and take on the 6th gym, which happens to be based on flying types. You'd think it'd be grass type given the town we're in, but I suppose it makes sense given that birds like to make their homes in trees. Wynona's gym looks really cool. Even though the puzzles are the same as the original, the gym now looks like it's inside a tree. Once we beat her, we get the feather badge and gain the ability to use fly outside of battle. With that done, we can now head down the rest of Route 120 towards Lily Cove. I like that when you get far enough in the route, you can see the rain clear up and see the reflection of the clear sky in the water. This looks great here, but it even looked good in the originals. Just before reaching Lily Cove, we can head to Mount Pyre and see what Team Magma is up to. It's a short surf before we reach the base of the mountain, which turns out to be the cemetery of the Hoenn region. After a few floors, we reach the peak and get that great camera angle I've been enjoying in the remakes. We see Maxie grabbing a red orb and walking off before we're challenged by Admin Courtney, who we beat easily. One of the old people there tells us that the orbs must never be separated and that we must take the blue orb and stop Team Magma's evil schemes. They were headed back to Slateport, so we head there next. At the marina, we see Maxie stealing the submarine where he'll take it back to their base of operations, which happens to be in Lily Cove. This is another port town. I love the look of the city. It's much more bustling. There's even a museum and a department store, which usually indicates a bigger population in terms of the Pokémon games. Anyway, we can finally head to the Lily Cove hideout, which is just off the east coast of town. The hideout has seen a massive visual upgrade from the originals and it looks great. This is one of the bigger dungeons in the game, and yes, there's even warp puzzles. Eventually, we can find Maxie's office where we find the Master Ball. I believe this is missable, which is crazy, but thankfully I remember to grab it. Once we get to the final room, we find the submarine, but first we get attacked by a horde of magma grunts. Horde battles were introduced in X and Y for wild Pokemon, but I believe this is the only instance in the series where you engage in a horde trainer battle. It's pretty unique, and I thought it was kinda cool. We then battle Admin Courtney yet again, which buys Maxie enough time to escape with the submarine. Courtney tells us that he's headed for the seafloor cavern and there's nothing we can do to stop him now. With all this out of the way, we get another break from the villain plot just for a little bit. Next, we head east on Route 124 leading to Moss Deep. The next few routes are water-based, and this is where the whole idea of too much water comes from. I wholeheartedly disagree with this idea. Firstly, Hoenn is huge and full of variety, so this complaint has never really made a lot of sense to me. Plus, to me, I think it's an awesome idea that the rest of the region is an archipelago with little islands to explore and towns that rest on the sea. It's one of my favorite sections of the game, and it gets even better when we get access to dive, which won't be for a while. After a quick surf, we reach Moss Deep City. This is another really cool town that I like a lot. The houses look like more classical Japanese architecture, and there's a whole space center on this little island. This becomes important later in the remake specifically, but as a kid, I remember thinking this place had something to do with Deoxys, which sadly never ended up being the case. We can also face the 7th gym leader here, which is pretty different. The original Gen 3 games introduced double battles to the series, so to exemplify this, we have a double battle against Tate and Liza. This battle was rough as a kid. I couldn't beat it for ages. Sometimes I just reset my game as soon as I reached Moss Deep. I'm realizing while making this video I didn't know how to team build very well as a kid. This fight is much easier in the remakes, and once we defeat them, we get the Mind Badge and gain the ability to use Dive outside of battle. Upon leaving the gym, we see a giant green beam of light pulsing from the ocean. Steven pulls us into his house where he tells us the seal that's been hidden undersea has been undone. He gives us Dive and tells us to investigate the seafloor cavern. 127 is another water route, only this time there's diving spots all over the place. This is another thing that makes Hoenn really unique. Other gens have tried to replicate diving, but none have pulled it off nearly as well as Ruby and Sapphire. The underwater sections look really nice in the remakes, and the music is super nostalgic. I love the feeling of mystery and discovery anytime you take a dip below the surface of the ocean. Anyway, when you dive down on a specific part of the route, we can find the seafloor cavern and come back up to the surface, where we find the stolen submarine. This is yet another pretty big dungeon, and I love the idea that we're exploring a cave that was hidden behind a diving spot. As expected, the dungeon is packed with magma grunts, but we managed to get to the bottom without much trouble. Eventually, we enter a room where we can see Archie and Maxie arguing with Groudon and Stasis in a pit of lava. Maxie goes on about how he's finally able to awaken the Pokémon that will fulfill his dreams before challenging us to a final battle. After we defeat Maxie, he laughs maniacally and proceeds to revive the Groudon with the red orb. Watching this scene unfold in full 3D felt so satisfying. Seeing Groudon and Kyogre in 3D all those years ago on the GameCube made me imagine the day I'd see something like this finally happen. Once Groudon's power was finally unleashed, it fled the Cave of Origin, which resides in Sootopolis City. I want to mention that both Archie and Tabitha told Maxie that this was a mistake and it would bring upon the end of the world, but he wouldn't listen. Only when Groudon was finally released, he realized the mistake he made. I love that when we get to the surface, the sunlight is so strong that it even changes the way the overworld looks. With all that out of the way, the only thing to do is head to Sootopolis and put an end to the end times. Getting to Sootopolis always confused me as a kid. It requires you to use dive, and I used to have to look it up on YouTube every time. But nowadays, it's as simple as diving on Route 126 and heading through the sea cave. Sootopolis is a really cool city built in the crater from a meteor strike. It looks like it was inspired by Greece and just has a really cool vibe to it. This is the last major city in Hoenn, and they were still thinking of cool and different ideas for towns and locations. It's one of my favorite towns in the game, but before I get carried away, we have a legendary to battle. At the Cave of Origin, we receive a Magma suit which is supposed to help us endure the heat. Maxie apologizes for his mistakes and Archie is rooting us on. It's actually pretty interesting because in the originals, the story was often flagged for being weak, but in the remakes, the villains not only make more sense but seem much more human and likable. Even the admins seem to have more character and charm. These were my favorite villains growing up, mostly due to nostalgia, but it seems like here they were actually decent story-wise. It's not the best story in Pokémon, but it's certainly serviceable and easily cracks the top 5 for me. Anyway, with that all done, it's time to take down Groudon once and for all. The cutscenes here are next level as we watch Groudon revert to its primal form. As much as I'm tempted to use the Master Ball here, it's important that we save it for later, so we're truly in for an epic fight now. It took a while, but we finally managed to catch it in an Ultra Ball. Thankfully, this restored Hoenn back to normal, and the villain plot has now been completed. I love the cutscene that plays, showing all the people of the region coming out of their houses and looking up to the sky as things return to normal. Game Freak really went all out with this game, from the visuals to the cutscenes and all the new things they added. They changed story elements to make everything more human and cohesive, and after we catch Groudon, it honestly feels like a soft ending to the game. Maxie realizes his mistakes and feel like he went too far to be forgiven, and Archie has a deep moment where he wonders what type of world they should be leaving behind for the younger generation. It wraps things up in a nice little bow, but we're nowhere near done with the game. In fact, we still need to battle the final gym of Hoenn, which happens to be right here in Sootopolis. The gym leader is Wallace, who utilizes water-type Pokémon. I like this decision as it's fitting for the final battle in the eastern archipelago of Hoenn. His gym puzzle is kinda bland, but the visuals look really good. Once we beat Wallace, we get the rain badge and we can use Waterfall outside of battle. One thing you can absolutely complain about this region is exemplified here. Why is it necessary to have 3 separate water-based HMs? Surf makes sense because it's in every Pokemon game, and Dive was an interesting new feature that was worth taking up a move slot for. But Waterfall? This just seems redundant and poorly designed. They could have made it optional in the remakes and just had secret areas you could find, but sadly this too is required. I'll never say Hoenn has too much water, but it certainly has too many water HMs. Anyway, now that we have 8 gym badges, it's time to head over to Evergrande City and take on the Pokemon League. Evergrande is less of a city and more of a Pokemon Center, but it's described as the paradise of flowers, the sea, and Pokemon. This area holds good memories for me. I'll never forget finally getting here after restarting my games countless times as a kid. After starting from scratch so many times from tough battles or getting lost, reaching Evergrande felt like I finally made it. I enjoy making these videos, but they take a long time. It's kinda funny because I find myself feeling the same way now as I did as a kid. A little sad the adventure is almost over, but happy that all the hard work is almost done. Up ahead is Victory Road. In most Pokemon games, this is the big final dungeon before reaching the Pokemon League, and this is no exception. If you're familiar with the series, you might think you'd have to fight May at the end, but instead, our final rival fight is actually with Wally, and his team is now fully trained up. This was a great mini-story within the games. We see Wally go from sickly and timid to a confident and fierce trainer. His story isn't groundbreaking, but it's really great, and it's why so many fans love Wally even to this day. After he's defeated, he's determined to continue to become stronger, and we finally reach the Pokemon League, which looks inspired by more traditional Japanese architecture. I'm sorry that I've mentioned it so many times, but this location looks great and I can't help but to bring it up. The Elite Four is made up of Sydney, the Dark-type trainer, Phoebe, the Ghost-type trainer, Glacia, the Ice-type trainer, and Drake, the Master of Dragon types. I like the Elite Four and Hoenn quite a bit. It felt like they had variety in their teams, and types that they used were somewhat underutilized by this point in the series. In the originals, these battles can be brutally tough, but here I didn't have much trouble. The only thing we have to worry about now is the champion, who happens to be Steven. Steven has a fantastic team and even uses Mega Evolution on his Metagross at the end. He's not very hard to beat, but I really like the final battle. When we do beat him, May and the professor show up to congratulate us on our victory, and we officially become the champion of the Hoenn region. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are my favorite remakes in the series by far. At the time, they weren't well loved by everyone, but the fan base often goes through a cycle of not liking a game until a few years have passed. Given the release of BDSP, these games nowadays are looked back on a lot more favorably, but I've loved them since day one. Like I said at the start of the video, the Gen 3 games shaped my childhood. To this day, I can attribute a lot of my taste in video games to Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. These remakes feel like an absolute love letter to those games. They kept the spirit of exploration and mystery that made the originals so fantastic. The Hoenn region is easily one of the best we ever got, and to this day, Game Freak struggles to capture the simple charm that these games have. They pack so much into the games, like berry farming, contests, secret bases, diving, the list goes on. Some fans don't like that they excluded the Battle Frontier, and I don't like it either, but they made up for it by including a very good post-game. The Delta episode is one of the greatest parts of the remake, which I'm not covering here, but it was amazing getting to catch Deoxys after years of wishing I had one. I don't hate the modern Pokemon games, but I don't think there will ever be another game in the series that makes me feel the way I do when I play Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. These games have heart, and they shine as bright as ever, even to this day. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.